Why would a woman everyone dismissed as an admin officer beat elite soldiers at their own drills, save a wounded trainee like a battlefield medic, crack military encryption in minutes, and then call in a classified extraction team no one else should even know exists? Because Captain Laya Anders wasn't there to fit in. She was there to expose a traitor from the inside.
Have you ever been singled out and humiliated in front of everyone for a reason so ridiculous it's almost funny? That's how Colonel Victor Hale liked his morning coffee. His voice sliced through the frozen air. Captain Anders, if your own uniform is beyond your capabilities, how in the world can you be trusted with a command? Just like that, 60 soldiers froze mid-breath, their exhalations clouding the air as every single head turned. There, in the center of a perfect circle of judgment, stood Captain Laya Anders. She was a compact woman, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a knot so tight it looked painful, and her eyes held the quiet fury of a gathering storm. But she didn't flinch. Her breathing was even, steady. And if you think this is just another story about a workplace bully, you need to hear the rest, because what happens next is something nobody saw coming. The colonel dropped down from the platform, the sharp clicks of his boots on the pavement echoing as he circled her like a predator. "Is everyone seeing this?" he bellowed, stabbing a finger at a speck of grease on her collar so small you could barely see it. This is the kind of decay that begins when we get soft, when we allow times certain elements times into our ranks. He loaded that last part with so much poison that everyone knew he meant times women asterisk. A few guys in the back snickered. Laya's face was a perfect, neutral mask, but her knuckles had gone completely white. Hale got so close she could smell the sour coffee on his breath. "I ought to send you back to whatever cubicle you crawled out of. But first," the colonel boomed, "Corporal Briggs, get up here!" A man built like a refrigerator, Jake Briggs, swaggered forward. He was 240 pounds of raw muscle and pure smugness, and he'd been grinning this whole time. "Sir," he barked, his voice booming with over-the-top eagerness. The colonel waved a hand dismissively at Leia. "The captain's shirt. I need you to, confirm times it meets regulations." The order was so strange, so completely against protocol, that a wave of uneasy silence washed over the formation. For a split second, even Briggs looked hesitant before stepping behind Laya. She remained perfectly still, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing unchanged. Briggs grabbed the collar of her shirt. "Ma'am," he grunted, his voice oozing with fake respect. And then he tore it. The sound of ripping cloth was like a gunshot in the silent, frigid air. Her shirt was split from her neck down to her waist. A collective gasp rippled through the soldiers as the freezing air rushed against her bare back. But it wasn't the humiliation that stunned them into silence. It was what the torn shirt revealed. An enormous, incredibly detailed tattoo of a hawk covered her entire back, its wings stretching from one shoulder blade to the other, its talons extended as if to strike. The craftsmanship was so precise you could almost count the feathers. Faint lines of script were woven into the bird's chest and wings, too small to read from a distance, but the artistry was undeniable. This was no cheap, impulsive ink from some weekend dare. It was a masterpiece carved into her skin, and it was clearly more than just decoration. Far in the back, a veteran sergeant's eyes went wide with sudden recognition. But then the snickering started up again. "Whoa, check out the Angry Bird," someone mumbled. "What, did she get that with cereal box tops?" Another one cracked, and the laughter started to spread. Colonel Hale stood with his arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on his face. "Well now, Captain, that is quite the personal statement," he sneered. "Let me guess, that work of art set you back a month's pay?" The laughter got louder, and Leia simply stood there, motionless, as the ruined pieces of her shirt danced in the cold wind. As the sun finally cleared the barracks, its light caught the ink, and the hawk seemed to glow. Squinting, Hale tried to make out the writing on its chest. "What's that supposed to say? Some inspirational garbage like live, laugh, love?" He mocked, and his sycophants roared. Briggs, still clutching a piece of her shirt like a trophy, chimed in, "Looks like the kind of thing you get after watching too many action movies, sir." Hale nodded as if this was a profound insight. Indeed, The wannabe tough guy special. I'm sure she has a pickup truck with oversized tires too. He turned to address the entire formation. Let this be a lesson for all of you. You can cover yourselves in all the ink you want, but it's no substitute for actual skill and real-world experience. He gave Laya a final, withering look. Get a new shirt, Captain, and cover that monstrosity up. This is a military base, not a carnival freak show. With a flick of his hand, he dismissed them all. Laya finally let out a long, controlled breath. She turned on her heel and walked towards the barracks, head held high, spine ramrod straight, without uttering a single word. A storm of whispers broke out behind her. Can you believe the audacity? Probably got it on spring break. Looks like she couldn't afford to get it colored in. But at the very edge of the crowd, Sergeant Major Thomas Hayes wasn't laughing at all. At 58 years old, Hayes had spent 32 of them in the service. He'd seen it all, and right now, he was seeing something these rookies were completely missing. That style of tattoo, that wasn't something you picked from a book in a strip mall. That was the kind of ink a soldier earns, the kind that tells a story. As Leia vanished into a doorway, he glanced over at the man beside him, Commander Adam Reed, a Navy SEAL on a joint training assignment. Reed was staring at the spot where Leia had just been standing. See something interesting, Commander? Hayes asked quietly. Reed gave a slow shake of his head. Her control, he said. When that gorilla put his hands on her, she didn't react. Not a twitch. It was like she was waiting for it. Hayes grunted. Waiting for what? Reed's face was serious. The impact. The pain. She has total mastery of her physical response. The only people I've ever seen with that kind of discipline have made it through SARE. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. A notoriously brutal training course designed for only the most elite special forces operators on the planet. Hayes' eyebrows shot up his forehead. You think she's more than just a supply officer? Reed said nothing. A few minutes later, in a sterile bathroom, Laya looked at her reflection. Her shirt was destroyed, but under the humming fluorescent lights, the hawk on her back seemed to have its own pulse. She pulled a small, worn coin from her pocket. The metal was smooth from countless hours of being held. One side showed a bird in flight, the other a series of digits. She traced the familiar patterns with her thumb before setting it down on the edge of the sink. Her expression in the mirror was completely blank, no anger, no humiliation, just that same steady, rhythmic breathing. And then, for the very first time that morning, the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a chess master who has just watched her opponent fall for a trap she set 10 moves ago. She put on a clean shirt, tucked the coin away, and walked back out into the world. The rest of the day was a clinic in petty torments. At lunch, someone asked loudly if she was planning to fly south for the winter. A training instructor sarcastically asked if she had any other body art she'd like to present to the group. Laya let it all roll off her back. She did her job. She filed her reports. She managed the logistics, the thankless, invisible work that keeps an entire base functioning. By noon, her name was a punchline. To pull an Anders had become shorthand for being all talk and no action. Some tech guy even created a private group chat called The Eagle Has Landed, complete with a cartoon hawk emoji. In less than an hour, more than 20 people were in the chat. Laya had no idea about the messages, but she saw everything else. She was observing. She made a mental note of every person who laughed, every person who looked away, and the very few who now looked at her with a flicker of something that looked a lot like fear. At the same time, in his office, Colonel Hale was reviewing her service record. Captain Laya Anders, age 29, intelligence analyst, a string of unremarkable assignments, currently stationed here. The file was squeaky clean and profoundly dull. No combat history, no special ops, nothing. He slapped the folder shut, feeling completely vindicated. Just another desk jockey with a chip on her shoulder, he muttered aloud. He dealt with her kind 1,000 times. That tattoo was probably the most exciting thing that had ever happened to her. But Hale had bigger problems. Laya was an unknown variable in the perfectly controlled ecosystem he ran, and he couldn't afford that. Not with a major inspection on the horizon, and certainly not with some irregular financial reports he needed to keep buried deep. He had to make an example of her, crush her spirit, and put her back in her place. Model. Have you ever been pushed into a corner, set up to fail so badly that everyone is just waiting to watch you fall apart? That's exactly what happened to Captain Laya Anders. A bitter officer, tired of her quiet competence, decided to teach her a lesson. He made a single call. The very next morning, he announced her new assignment in front of everyone. Captain Anders, you're being reassigned. Effective immediately, you'll be joining Bravo team for their live-fire combat drill. The field went dead quiet. Since you care so much about appearances, the officer sneered, here's your chance to show us you're more than just a paper pusher. Your gear's waiting. Be at the range at 0800. This wasn't some analyst training. This was a deadly, close-quarters scenario built for the most elite operators on the base. He had just thrown her to the wolves. This wasn't a training exercise. It was a public humiliation, designed to make a logistics officer crumble in front of a team of hardened killers. And Captain Laya Anders knew it. Even so, she just gave a curt nod, yes, sir. When she arrived at the range, the equipment they had set aside for her was a cruel joke. The rifle looked like a relic from a forgotten war, its stock covered in a web of scratches, and the iron sights were so obviously bent it was almost funny. The combat vest they gave her was 2 sizes too large, hanging off her like a potato sack, and her radio earpiece hissed with static. The actual members of Bravo team geared up nearby, watching her with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Finally, a young corporal named Miles Chen sauntered over. No offense, ma'am, but have you, ever done this for real? Laya simply cinched the straps on the absurdly large vest as tight as they would go. I'll manage. Chen shot a cocky grin back to his teammates. Okay, Captain, here's the drill. 3 rooms to clear. Good guys and bad guys are all mixed in. We breach, we neutralize the threats, and we don't shoot the friendlies. You're on rear security. In other words, stay behind us and try not to get in the way. The team leader, a tough staff sergeant named Travis Cole, added in a softer but equally dismissive tone. Look, Captain, there's no shame in backing out. This isn't for everyone. We move fast. Laya looked him straight in the eye, her face a calm, unreadable mask. I'm sure I can keep up, she said again. Cole let out a loud, dramatic sigh. All right, it's your funeral, the buzzer screamed. As the team stacked up on the door, Laya melted into position at the very back, her battered rifle held perfectly at the ready. The door blew inward from the breaching charge, and the team poured into the room like a flash flood of shouts and controlled aggression. Laya moved like a ghost right behind them. They cleared the first room in seconds. 2 targets down, no friendlies touched. But as they charged into the second room, their confidence made them careless. They were moving with too much swagger, and they completely overlooked a deep, dark corner. A hostile target popped up. Chen instinctively raised his rifle, but a friendly target was standing right in his path. He couldn't take the shot. Chen, you're blocked! Reposition! Cole screamed. But the giant clock on the wall was ticking. If a threat wasn't handled in under 3 seconds, the whole team failed the drill. Just as Cole started to swear under his breath, Laya moved. She didn't surge forward. She flowed sideways. 2 quick, nearly silent steps to her right opened up a completely new angle to the target. In a single, graceful motion, her rifle came up, and she fired 1 perfect shot. The hostile target jerked backward, a fresh hole in its center. Chen could only gawk, his jaw slack. How did you even? But Laya was already gliding toward the third and final room. Cole blinked, shaking off his shock, and barked at his team to follow. The last room was an absolute nightmare. 4 hostiles and 2 friendlies jammed into a space no bigger than a closet. The team got tangled, tripping over each other, unable to find a clear shot. Someone needed to take a dangerous angle. Without hesitating, Laya dropped to 1 knee, creating a lower firing position, and fired 2 precise shots. 2 more hostiles went down. The friendlies were untouched. The drill ended. The range is clear, a voice crackled over the intercom. Final time, 47 seconds. That sets a new facility record. Absolute silence fell over the room. The voice added, and, for what it's worth, the old record was 52 seconds. held by a visiting instructor from SEAL Team 6. The men just stood there, completely dumbfounded. Chen looked from his top-of-the-line, customized rifle to Laya. What just happened? Cole's expression had shifted from annoyance to utter disbelief. Captain, where on earth did you learn to shoot like that? Laya calmly ejected the magazine and cleared her weapon. Practice, she said, her voice flat. She placed the rifle on the table and walked out, leaving the entire team frozen in a state of shock. Cole immediately pulled out his phone and began typing frantically. Far above in the observation deck, a man named Hayes was staring intently at a monitor. "Replay that," he ordered. The technician played the video back in slow motion. Hayes wasn't looking at the targets. He was studying Leia's footwork. The methodical way she cleared corners, her perfect weapon control, her flawless trigger discipline. Every single move was ruthlessly efficient. The kind of skill that can only be forged in the heat of real-world combat. This wasn't practice. This was instinct. A muscle memory so profound, it was like breathing. He zoomed in on her grip, her thumbs pointing forward, elbows tight against her body. It was the unmistakable form of a Tier 1 special operator. Hayes leaned back from the screen. "Commander Reed," he spoke into his comms. "I suggest you get down here. You need to see this." Reed showed up 10 minutes later. Hayes just hit play. Reed watched the footage, his expression unreadable. When it was over, he pointed to the screen. "Go back. The second room. That shot she took. Freeze it there." Reed stared at the still image, analyzing her stance, her posture, the slight tilt of her head. "That's a JSOC technique," he said softly. He was talking about the Joint Special Operations Command, the absolute tip of the military spear, home to groups like Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. The way she's using that door frame for stability, they only teach that in the Advanced Hostage Rescue course, the one for guys who do this for a living. Hayes nodded. "And her shots in the final room?" I pulled the report. Both rounds landed inside a 2-inch grouping, from 15 feet, while kneeling, with a rifle that had bent sights. Reed stroked his chin, putting the pieces together. She compensated for the bad sights on the fly. That means she knew the weapon was flawed the moment she picked it up, which means she knows her weapons. Hayes finished, like asterisk intimately times knows them. They both looked at Leia's image on the monitor, her face a picture of cold, detached focus. There was no adrenaline rush, no excitement, just a professional doing a job she had clearly done thousands of times before. Reed pulled up her official service record on his phone and scanned it again. It says right here she's an intelligence analyst, no advanced weapons courses, no combat tours, nothing. Just a big, empty space. "So how did she get so good?" Hayes asked. Reed didn't have an answer. Down on the now empty range, Laya was alone. She had lingered to pick up her spent brass, a deeply ingrained habit from a life she had supposedly left behind. She quietly collected 3 of the empty casings and placed them on the ground in a tiny triangle. She looked at the simple pattern for a long second, then scattered the shells with the toe of her boot. Some habits were just too risky to maintain. As she started to leave, she almost bumped into Sergeant Carter, the range officer, who was nervously holding a clipboard. "Captain Anders, that was something else." Laya gave him a brief, polite nod. "Thank you." Carter cleared his throat, trying to find the words. "Listen, I've been running this range for 8 years. I've seen Rangers, Green Berets, SEALs, even a few Delta guys come through here. And you, ma'am, you just blew all of their records out of the water." Laya's expression remained unchanged. The conditions were perfect. There was no wind today. Carter just stared at her, completely confused. "Wind? Ma'am, we're indoors." "Exactly," Laya said, and walked straight past him, leaving him standing there like a statue. He glanced down at the target report in his hands. Every single one of her shots was in the thoracic triangle, the kill zone. Not a single miss, not one wasted motion. In his entire career, he'd seen thousands of shooters, but only a handful ever showed that kind of surgical lethality. And they all had one thing in common. They had been to war. He raised his radio. "Range control to Commander Reed. I need to speak with him now. It's important." If you've ever been underestimated, you know that amazing feeling of proving everyone wrong in the most epic way possible. Go ahead and smash that like button if you believe actions speak way louder than words. And if you want to find out how this quiet storm is about to flip their entire world upside down, make sure you subscribe, because her real story is just getting started. By dinner time, the story of Laya's impossible performance was the talk of the entire base. But it didn't win her any friends. It just made everyone suspicious. In the mess hall, a soldier named Foster was holding court, loudly telling anyone who would listen. So she had a good run. Big whoop. I bet she practiced that exact drill for weeks. Somebody at his table pushed back. But how would she know which drill it was going to be? Foster just waved it off. She's a liaison, isn't she? Probably got a peek at the training schedule. It's the only thing that makes sense. A few others nodded along. It was the easy answer, the one that let their bruised egos heal. Some pencil pusher had cheated to make them all look like fools. That was a whole lot easier to believe than the alternative. At a different table, a soldier named Briggs just stared at his food, completely silent and lost in his own thoughts. It started for him the moment the guy tore her shirt. He had her backed into a corner, trying to scare her after she'd just obliterated a Navy SEAL's record by a full 47 seconds. But when he grabbed her, she didn't flinch. She just stood there. No fear, no anger, nothing. It was like he was a ghost. That eerie calm creeped him out more than anything. Just who was this woman? If you want to find out the unbelievable truth behind the soldier who wasn't supposed to exist, you need to hear this. Briggs had lost his appetite completely and shoved his tray away. Across the crowded room, Laya sat by herself, totally ignoring the whispers and the dirty looks. She just ate her food with a quiet, mechanical rhythm, a few bites of chicken, some rice, a forkful of vegetables, 4 bites, a sip of water, then 4 more bites. It was precise, disciplined, almost robotic. Over by the serving line, another soldier named Hayes watched her, and a tight knot formed in the pit of his stomach. He'd seen people eat like that before, with that same focused, almost desperate efficiency. He'd seen it in prisoners of war, men who had been starved to the brink of death and treated every last calorie like it was treasure, because they had no idea when they'd ever see another meal. That same night, Commander Reed was lying wide awake in his bunk, just staring up at the ceiling. He couldn't get the training footage of Laya out of his head. The way she moved, so smooth and efficient, it sparked a faint, nagging memory from a mission almost 20 years ago. He was only 19 then, a fresh-faced SEAL assigned to a convoy escort in Syria. The mission was a cakewalk: guard a high-value analyst as she moved from one safe house to the next. The analyst was a small, quiet woman Reed had hardly even looked at twice. And then, his whole world exploded. A roadside bomb detonated, vaporizing the truck in front of them. The shockwave picked up Reed's Humvee and tossed it through the air like a child's toy. The world was just a spinning nightmare of fire and sand. When it finally slammed back to Earth, he was pinned inside a mangled cage of steel. His vision was closing in, and he could feel the warm, sticky pool of his own blood spreading beneath him. That's when he felt them, a pair of small, steady hands pulling him free. A voice, impossibly calm in the middle of the carnage, whispered, "Stay with me. Breathe in for 4 seconds. Now out for 4 seconds." It was the analyst. She had somehow wrestled him out of the wreckage, dragged him behind cover, and was putting perfect pressure on his wounds. She called in the rescue chopper on her own radio and never left his side until everything went black. He woke up later in a field hospital, but she was gone. The official report was a brick wall, a civilian contractor whose entire file was classified top secret. For years, he'd searched for the angel who had saved his life just so he could thank her. And now, as he shot bolt upright in his bed, his heart was pounding like a drum. In for 4, out for 4. Reed could still hear her voice. That breathing technique wasn't just a simple trick to calm a panic attack. It was a clue. He grabbed his laptop and plunged into the classified military archives. He ran a search for every single civilian contractor who had served in Syria between 2017 and 2019. He began adding filters: medical training, intelligence background, female, between 25 and 30 years old. 43 names popped up. He added more keywords: certified in combat first aid, trained in human intelligence, spoke local dialects. The list got shorter. 20 names. Then 10. Then 5. And then, finally, a single file loaded onto his screen. The name beside the photo made his blood turn to ice. Captain Leia Anders. Assignment: Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell. Status: Killed in action. 2019. Record permanently sealed. Reed just stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process it. KIA. But she was right here, on this base, alive. That could only mean one of two things. The entire Defense Department's database was catastrophically wrong, or someone had gone to unbelievable lengths to fake her death, to erase her from the world, and turn her into a living ghost. The very next morning, during a training exercise, a new private named Lee got cocky and missed his grip on an obstacle wall. He plummeted 12 feet and hit the ground with a sickening crunch that made everyone's stomach heave. A raw scream tore through the morning air. His left leg was bent at a gruesome, impossible angle. A shard of white bone had ripped straight through his fatigues, and blood was already darkening the gravel around him. For a long second, everyone just stood there, frozen in shock. Then someone screamed, "Medic!" But the medic was on the far side of the course, a good 300 yards away. It would take him at least 5 minutes to get there. Lee just kept screaming as his squad stood around him, paralyzed and useless while panic spread through them like a disease. And then, as if she had been beamed there, Leia appeared. She dropped to a knee beside him, her voice cutting clean through his agonized cries. "Lee, look at me." His wild, terrified eyes found hers. "Breathe with me," she commanded, her voice somehow both iron-firm and gentle. "In for 4. She took a slow, deliberate breath to show him. Lee choked on a sob and tried to follow her lead. Out for 4. Little by little, his ragged gasps started to even out, but Leia was already in motion. From a cargo pocket, she produced a small medkit with combat gauze, a splint, and nitrile gloves. That was not standard gear for a liaison officer. Where did she get that? With a practiced snap, she pulled the gloves on. "This is going to hurt more than anything you've ever felt," she told him, her voice dead calm. "But if I don't set this bone right now, you might lose the leg. Do you understand me?" Lee, with tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face, gave a tiny, trembling nod. Leia moved with a stunning speed and efficiency. She began packing the wound with gauze, applying firm, direct pressure to slow the bleeding. Her hands were rock steady, sure of every single movement, and she never stopped talking, her voice cool and clinical. "The human body can lose about 15% of its blood volume before you go into shock. You're at about 8% right now. You're doing great. You're going to be okay." Lee latched onto her words like a life raft. She expertly splinted his leg, locking the fracture in place. Then she pulled out a radio. It wasn't a standard training model. This one was smaller, far more advanced. She keyed the microphone. "This is NATO training actual," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "I require an immediate medevac. I have 1 casualty. Compound fracture of the left tibia and fibula. Bleeding is under control. Patient is stable but needs surgery within the next 30 minutes. Then she rattled off a perfect 9-line report, the kind medics use to call for help when they're under enemy fire. It was flawless. Line 1, grid coordinates. Line 2, radio frequency and call sign. Line 3, number of patients. Line 4, special equipment needed. All the way down to line 9, patient's nationality. The soldiers watching were in absolute awe. You don't learn how to do that in a classroom. You learn that by calling in real helicopters while bullets are cracking past your ears, in a place where one tiny mistake gets people killed. The helicopter touched down in less than 7 minutes. Medics swarmed out, took one look at Lee, and loaded him onto a stretcher. The lead paramedic stopped for a second. "Who stabilized him?" he asked. Someone pointed a shaky finger at Leia. The paramedic gave her work a quick, professional look, the perfectly packed wound, the expertly tied splint. "This is textbook," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Actually, no. This is better than textbook. You just saved this private's leg." Laya stood up and peeled off her blood-soaked gloves. He did all the hard work, she said softly. He stayed calm, but the paramedic knew better. Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been doing this for 15 years. What you just did, that's Tactical Combat Casualty Care, TCCC. That's Special Forces level training. Where did you learn that? Laya simply turned and walked away, leaving a crowd of dumbfounded soldiers behind her. Hayes finally pushed his way through the stunned group, his mind completely blown. His eyes locked onto the scene. The dark, wet stain of blood on the gravel next to the torn open medical packaging. He zoomed in. TCCC gear wasn't something they handed out to office staff. That was for the serious operators, the medics, the rangers, the Green Berets who go into places where calling for backup isn't an option. He bent down and picked up one of the discarded glove wrappers. It was military issue, all right, but the lot number was old, stamped from before 2020. That meant she hadn't just been given this stuff. She'd been carrying it in a personal kit for years. This was a woman who lived every day prepared for the absolute worst to happen. Hayes carefully folded the wrapper and slipped it into his pocket. Across the base, Lee was being wheeled into surgery. His mother had already been called and told that, thanks to the quick action on the field, her son was expected to make a full and complete recovery. The head surgeon was staring at a chart, his brow furrowed. "Who on earth stabilized this soldier?" he barked at a nurse. "This is work you'd see from a seasoned trauma specialist." The nurse checked the notes. "A Captain Anders, sir. She's just a liaison officer." The surgeon paused, grabbed his phone, and called the base commander. "Sir," he said, his voice tense, "we've either got a massive problem on our hands or we've got a secret weapon. I'm not sure which." A few hours later, I was standing in Major Owen Cross's office. Cross was a man who lived and breathed regulations, a wiry officer who looked like he was allergic to people. He didn't even bother to look up when I walked in. "Captain Anders, I've been told to review your medical training history with you." I stood there, perfectly still, a soldier carved from stone. "Sir," was all I said. Major Cross pushed a paper-thin folder toward me. "Your official file says you took a basic first aid course 6 years ago. That's the sum of it. There is absolutely nothing here that would authorize you to perform the kind of complex procedure you did on a fellow soldier." For the first time, he lifted his head, his eyes boring into mine. "And yet, today you executed a perfect 9-line medevac and provided a level of care that our chief surgeon believes saved Private Lee's leg, and very likely his life." I remained silent. Cross leaned back in his chair, which protested with a loud groan. "That leaves us with two possibilities. Either our official record system is a complete failure, or you are hiding a truly remarkable set of skills. So, Captain, which is it?" "I learned through experience, sir." "And what experience would that be?" "Previous assignment, sir." His eyes narrowed into tiny suspicious slits. "Your file shows you had desk jobs at Fort Bragg and Ramstein Air Base. Administrative roles. You have 0 recorded field experience." "Not a single deployment," Cross insisted, his voice thick with disbelief. "So allow me to ask you one final time, where did you get this so-called experience?" I met his stare head on. "Sir, sometimes the lessons that count the most are the ones that never make it into the official record." He glared at me for a long, silent moment before snapping the file shut with a sharp crack. "For your own good, Captain, I'm going to act as if this conversation never happened, but you need to know the whispers have already started. And when people begin to dig, they usually find what they're looking for, whether you want them to or not." I gave him a sharp nod. "Understood, sir." I turned and walked out. The second that door clicked shut, I knew he was on the phone. "Colonel Hale, we have a situation. It's about Captain Anders." By that night, photos of me desperately working to save Private Lee were already being passed around in a private chat group. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? I mean, really punished, to the point where it could cost you everything you've ever worked for? If you have, you need to hear this story. Because what happened to me was a masterclass in betrayal. And if you're someone who always cheers for the person knocked down, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button right now. It all blew up over saving a man's life. Private Lee. I was just a liaison officer who happened to be there, but I had the skills to keep him from dying, so I used them. But instead of a thank you, my actions triggered an investigation that threatened to uncover a past I had buried for 6 long years. It was a past I had to hide, a past where my skills got my entire team wiped off the books. I was a ghost, living in a new life, and someone had just turned on a searchlight. The first surprise was that the system wasn't designed to thank you. It was designed to question you. My commander, Major Cross, didn't see a life saved. He saw a rule broken. Surprise number 2, the investigation he started was actually working. 2 guys from Intel, Hayes and Reed, started connecting dots I had prayed would stay scattered. But here's the biggest shock. They weren't trying to burn me. They were trying to figure me out. They found the real story. And that led to the big reveal. They unearthed a deeply buried, classified file about a special unit that officially never existed. A ghost unit. And my name, my real name, was in it. The revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet and absolute. The file proved I wasn't a liar. I was a survivor. The people who set my old team up were finally held accountable. The university, the military didn't just clear my name. They recognized my real skills and offered me a position as a lead combat medic instructor. It was more than I had ever hoped for. So, what's the lesson here? Never let a piece of paper or a job title define what you're capable of. Your true value isn't in your official record. It's in what you do when everything hits the fan. Because your integrity, your truth, and a bit of hard-earned skill are more powerful than any regulation ever written. Never, ever let them make you small. They were huddled in the glow of a computer screen, replaying the drone footage. Me, in the middle of all that chaos, calmly and efficiently saving Private Lee's life. Hayes was the one who spoke first. I checked the lot numbers on her medical supplies. This gear was made way back in 2018. The entire kit is over 6 years old. Reed didn't take his eyes off the monitor. A thought clicking into place. That means she's been carrying her own secret trauma kit this whole time, he said, more to himself than anyone else. And her bedside manner, the way she talked Lee out of a full-blown panic attack, that's straight up psychological first aid. PFA. They drill that into operators who have to function in the absolute worst places on Earth. Hayes nodded, his eyes wide as saucers. Exactly. Like Special Forces medics, the kind of people who see things so horrific they need a script just to keep a patient from dying of pure terror. Reed leaned in, rubbing his forehead. That's not even the half of it. I found something else. Something they tried to bury so deep in the classified network it barely even exists anymore. What if you were one of the most elite soldiers in the world, a true ghost, but your entire history was erased, forcing you to live as a nobody? Every day, you show up to a dead-end office job, letting smug coworkers treat you like you're completely invisible. That's been Laya's reality. But what happens when a ghost gets tired of playing dead? Stick around to see, and if you're a fan of epic underdog stories, hit that subscribe button right now. You see, a couple of guys were already starting to put the pieces together. You ever hear of something called the Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell? Reed asked, his voice low. A deep Black Ops team that ran missions in Syria and Iraq from 2017 to 2019. They handled intel, recon, and when a target needed to vanish, they were the ones who made it happen. So, where are they now? Hayes asked, his voice barely a whisper. Reed's face hardened. The whole unit got zeroed out in 2019. The official report says most of them were killed in action. For the few who might have survived, their service records were completely scrubbed, like they never existed. And Leia? Reed gave a slow, heavy nod. She was on that list of KIAs, but the official report is full of holes. There was no body, no positive identification. They just presumed she was gone after an operation went bad. Hayes leaned closer, completely drawn in. You really think she was a ghost hawk? I think someone took extreme measures to convince the world she was dead, Reed countered. And now, she just happens to surface here, acting like some meek little analyst who lets everyone walk all over her? I don't buy it. People don't get erased from every government database on the planet unless they're running from something terrifying or they're hunting something even worse. Captain Laya's official file paints her as a glorified desk jockey, but her every move suggests she's a predator in disguise. So what's her real mission here? Drop your best guesses in the comments, and if you're as intrigued as I am, share this with a friend so we can figure this out together. Her cover was almost blown just 2 days later. An urgent encrypted message came in from a base in Poland carrying targeting data for a massive drone operation. It should have been a simple task, but the base's lone cryptographer was out of commission with a nasty case of food poisoning. That code needed to be cracked within 20 minutes, or the entire exercise would be scrapped. Have you ever had a boss who was just waiting for you to fail and wanted a front row seat when you did? That's exactly the position Captain Laya found herself in. If she failed to decrypt those coordinates, a multi-million-dollar military exercise would be a total bust, making the whole command look like fools. Her boss, Colonel Hale, saw the perfect chance to humiliate her. He summoned Laya to the operations center, which was conveniently filled with the entire command staff. "Captain," he announced, his voice oozing with false sincerity, "Specialist Vega is unexpectedly ill. His backup won't arrive for another 45 minutes, but we only have 20. As our lead intelligence officer, I'm confident you can sort this out." Every eye in the room swiveled to her, all of them expecting a spectacular failure. "Do you think she's about to prove them wrong? Let's find out." Hale walked out of the room with a self-satisfied smirk on his face. The giant clock on the wall suddenly seemed to be ticking 10 times as loud. Another officer, Foster, swaggered over to her, crossing his arms. "Hey, Captain, there's no shame in being out of your league. Just say the word, and we'll cancel the mission." Laya didn't even acknowledge him. She slid into the vacant seat, her eyes fixed on the screen filled with a chaotic stream of digital garbage. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Someone from the back of the room mumbled, "She's got nothing." But then her hands moved, not to the keyboard, but to a pen and a clean sheet of paper. "Sometimes the old ways are best," she murmured. "It's a Caesar cipher, but it's been modified." The key rotates. It's probably tied to the message timestamp. Foster just stared at her with a condescending frown, clearly having no idea what she was talking about. Laya ignored him, her pen a blur as she scribbled down columns of letters and numbers, cross-referencing them with the message's digital signature. She moved with a purpose and skill that silenced the entire room. A complex encryption that would normally take a team of specialists hours to solve, she was dismantling in mere minutes. The clock ticked past the 5-minute mark, then 8, and the only sound you could hear was the scratching of her pen. Then she paused. She turned back to the keyboard and typed a single, flawless line of code, hitting the enter key with a quiet click. The wall of nonsense on the screen instantly resolved into a perfectly clear message, target coordinates, drone flight paths, everything. A nearby technician's jaw dropped. "How did you possibly?" Laya simply pushed her chair back and rose to her feet. "The message has been decrypted. Send it to the mission controller." She slid the paper with her notes across the desk to the speechless Foster and walked out of the room as if she'd just finished a simple puzzle. The total time from when she sat down, 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Foster stared down at the sheet of paper, a brilliant but chaotic storm of calculations that represented a master's lifetime of work. He turned it over. Tucked away in a tiny corner, so small he almost didn't see it, were 2 letters and a number, NH7. What in the world did that mean? He immediately took a picture with his phone and fired it off to his friend in intelligence, Hayes. "Found this on the analyst's notes. Does NH7 mean anything to you?" The second Hayes saw the image, his blood turned to ice. He didn't waste a second. He forwarded it directly to Commander Reed. "Sir, you need to look at this. Right now." Reed pulled the image up on his monitor, enlarging the tiny inscription. NH7, Nightingale 7. A chill ran down his spine. He immediately jumped into the classified archives and typed in the call sign. A file popped up. Nightingale 7, the official designation for an operative within the Ghost Hawk unit, a master cryptographer. Status, killed in action 2019. Reed's hand was literally trembling as he went to open the full profile, but a massive red banner flashed on the screen. Access denied. He was nowhere near the required clearance level. He sent a top priority request straight up the chain to a contact he knew in the SEALs. Not even 10 minutes later, his secure line buzzed. Commander Reed, you're speaking with Captain Ashford at Joint Special Operations Command. You just pinged a file that's been sealed for 5 years. You have my complete and total attention. Reed chose his words as if he were trying to disarm a live bomb. Sir, I believe an operative who is listed as KIA might still be alive and is currently working under a new identity here. The silence on the line was so thick he could feel it. Do not move from your desk. Do not discuss this with anyone. I have a team on its way to your location now. Reed hung up the phone and looked at Hayes, whose face was ghostly white. I think we just stepped on a landmine. The very next morning, Laya was informed she had one last evaluation, a live fire extraction exercise. She was assigned to a small team of 4 trainees whose mission was to rescue a high-value asset from a hostile building. The opposing force would be role players using simunition rounds, essentially powerful paintballs that sting like crazy but aren't lethal. The whole thing was meant to be the most intense and realistic training simulation possible. The team gathered at 0600 hours. Laya met the team leader, a man named Briggs, and the 3 others, Chen, Novak, and Torres. Briggs gave them the brief. All right, team, this is a clean and simple operation. We breach the building, clear 3 rooms, secure the package, and we're out. They say to expect minimal resistance, so we should be out of there in time for breakfast. They suited up, loading their rifles with magazines of the paint-marking rounds. The target building was a decaying 2-story warehouse with about a dozen possible entry points. The asset, a man wearing a bright orange vest, was hiding somewhere inside. They formed a stack on the main entrance as Briggs began his countdown. 3, 2, 1, breach! The door flew open, and the team poured inside, but instantly, something was very wrong. The building's layout was completely different from the blueprints they had memorized for hours. A long, dark corridor stretched out where there should have been a solid wall. Briggs cursed under his breath. Intel was totally wrong! Stay alert, people! We're improvising! They advanced slowly down the hall. The first room was empty. In the second, they encountered 2 hostiles, and Chen and Torres neutralized them with quick bursts of paint. But then, more figures began to materialize out of the shadows. Way more. This wasn't minimal resistance, it was a carefully planned ambush. Suddenly, there were 6 of them, then 8, then at least 10 combatants opening up with a hailstorm of paint. They were ridiculously, impossibly outnumbered. Fall back, get to the door, Briggs yelled, but it was already over. A spray of paint rounds stitched across Torres's chest, and he went down. Novak was hit with 3 rounds in the back, and he collapsed without a sound. Chen's voice was pure panic on the radio. I'm dry. I have no more ammo. A paintball exploded against Briggs's shoulder, the impact making his arm go limp as his rifle hit the ground. And just like that, it was down to me and him, totally exposed in the open and completely surrounded. I took in the situation in less than a second. We'd been strategically pushed into a kill box with no cover and no escape route. This was no longer a training exercise. This was an ambush. I keyed my radio. Command, this is Bravo team. We are under heavy fire and require immediate evac. The radio just hissed back static. They were jamming our comms. Of course they were. Briggs stared at me. His uniform splattered with neon paint that looked way too much like blood. Captain, it's finished. We have to give up. I just looked at the figures closing in on us, my team taken apart and beaten around me. And in that single moment, I made a choice. With her squad getting completely overrun, she slipped a hand into her tactical vest and pulled out a tiny, black radio. It was an encrypted, military-grade device that had absolutely no business being in a simple training exercise. She keyed the mic, and her voice was suddenly unrecognizable. The quiet, timid officer was gone, replaced by someone whose voice was ice-cold, steady, and all business. Nightingale 7 to Overwatch. I'm calling for an immediate evac. Coordinates are November Whiskey 4721. We've got 5 friendlies and 1 high-value asset. Authenticate with Tango Hotel November. For a heart-stopping moment, only static answered. Then, a calm male voice came through. Nightingale 7, we copy. Authentication confirmed. QRF is inbound. ETA is 2 minutes. The radio went silent. Briggs just stared at her, his mind unable to catch up with what was happening. What in the hell was that? Laya didn't even look at him. She just moved for cover and drew her sidearm. Even though it was just a paintball gun, the woman holding it was a completely different person. Her entire posture shifted. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. She wasn't some paper pusher from HQ anymore. She was a professional. The role players who were closing in on them actually paused, thrown off by her sudden aura of absolute command. And then the warehouse entrance didn't just open, it was blown clean off its frame. This wasn't a training charge. This was the real deal. 4 soldiers in full tactical gear, with no identifying patches, stormed the building. They moved with the terrifying precision of elite operators. The role players froze. One of them finally stammered out, "Hey, this is just a drill." The lead operator didn't break stride. "This drill is over. Clear the area now." They didn't need to hear it twice. They scattered like rats. In seconds, the operators had their target, secured the package, and were heading out. One of the operators shot Laya a quick, respectful nod as they disappeared. The entire rescue mission took less than 90 seconds. Briggs was left standing there in the sudden silence of the warehouse, his jaw on the floor. Who were those guys? Chen whispered, his eyes wide. Did actual special forces just save us? Laya calmly flipped the safety on her pistol, holstered it, and faced her stunned team. For the first time, she met their eyes with a gaze that was perfectly calm and unwavering. "We need to debrief." Her voice was different now. It was the voice of a true commander, the kind you obey without a second thought. Briggs just blinked. "Captain." Laya walked right past him towards the exit. "Let's go." And just like that, they followed her. Miles away, in the main command center, all hell was breaking loose. Commander Reed stared at the live feed on a giant screen, his face drained of all color. Hayes stood right next to him. On the monitor, they both watched the moment Laya pulled out her secret radio. Nightingale 7 to Overwatch. Reed's voice was a choked whisper. That call sign was deactivated back in 2019. Hayes pointed a sharp finger at the mystery soldiers on the screen. "And that team? I know that gear. That's a JSOC quick reaction force. You don't call in a team like that for a training drill." Reed rewound the footage. His gaze locked on Leia's face. He saw her flip from a nervous staffer to a stone-cold operator in a blink. "She's no liaison officer," he breathed. Hayes snorted. "No kidding." Reed turned to him, the sheer weight of what this meant finally crashing down on him. If she's a ghost hawk and she's here under an alias, then she's actively hunting someone. This isn't an exercise. This is a live operation. "Hunting someone," Hayes echoed, his gaze shifting to a different camera feed showing Colonel Hale's office. The colonel was on the phone, pacing like a caged animal, his face a thundercloud of pure fury. Reed's jaw tightened. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Hayes saw it at the exact same moment. "You don't think Hale is the target, do you?" Reed spoke slowly, connecting the dots. "I think we need to find out precisely what went down in 2019 and why the Ghost Hawk program was supposedly shut down for good." On the screen, Laya emerged from the warehouse. She looked straight up at a security camera, almost as if she knew they were watching her. And then, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that knows its prey has just walked into the trap. The screen went dead. The entire command center was immediately sealed under a full lockdown. Reed was instantly on the phone, making 3 frantic calls. The first to JSOC, the second to NATO security, and the third to his own boss at SEAL Command. He gave all 3 the same terrifying message. "We have a code red. A Ghost Hawk operative is active on this base. I need immediate containment protocols and an emergency security brief now." Hayes cleared the command center of all non-essential personnel until it was only him and Reed. Not even 15 minutes later, Two others joined them, General Patricia Calloway from JSOC and Colonel Hale himself, who had been summoned without an explanation. He stormed in, radiating anger and confusion. "Commander Reed, would someone mind telling me why I was just dragged out of a mission-critical briefing?" General Calloway, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a gaze to match, simply stood by the monitors with her arms crossed, saying nothing. They called her the joke of the base, a captain so clueless she couldn't even manage a simple training drill. For weeks, they'd made her life a living nightmare, and the one leading the charge was Colonel Hale, a decorated war hero with 3 combat tours and 2 Purple Hearts. But what this celebrated hero didn't realize was that the do-list captain he loved to humiliate was about to burn his entire world to the ground. And you're gonna want to stick around for this, because the way she gets her revenge is a story you have to see to believe. Inside a secure briefing room, General Calloway pointed to a frozen image of that captain. "Colonel Hale, tell me about the Ghost Hawk intelligence cell." A strange look flickered across Hale's face. "I'm aware of it. An old program from the Syria conflict. The entire unit was disbanded." Calloway's eyes narrowed. "No, it was aborted. There's a significant difference." She tapped the screen. "Your assessment of her?" "Captain Anders." Hale barely glanced at the photo. "She's a liaison officer. Her performance has been marginal at best, and today's failed exercise demonstrated profoundly poor judgment. She used unauthorized communication channels." From across the room, Commander Reed spoke up. "Those channels weren't unauthorized, sir. They were highly classified," Reed continued, "reserved for JSOC's quick reaction force. The kind of channels only the deepest cover. Most clandestine operators ever get." Hale just stared at him, completely floored. That's utterly impossible. Her security clearance isn't even in the same ballpark as before he could finish. Sergeant Major Hayes hit a button, and an audio file played. The captain's voice, calm and professional, filled the room. "Nightingale, 7 to Overwatch. Request immediate extract." The room was deathly quiet. Calloway's voice was soft, but every word landed like a sledgehammer. Nightingale 7 was the call sign of a Ghost Hawk operative back in 2018, a signals intelligence specialist. An operative who was officially declared killed in action after a mission was aborted in April of 2019. She fixed her icy stare right on Hale. "A mission that you personally aborted, Colonel." Every last bit of color drained from Hale's face. That mission was a complete disaster," he stammered, his voice tight. "The intelligence was bad. The enemy was waiting for us. I made the call to pull my team out. It was a textbook command decision." Calloway's voice turned razor sharp. 3 of your operators were killed during that extraction, Colonel. They died because their air support was mysteriously pulled away. They died because their escape route was changed at the last minute. They died because someone in command decided their lives were expendable." Hale's hands clenched into tight white fists. "Is that an accusation, General?" Calloway's face was a mask of stone. "I'm asking you to explain why Captain Leia Anders, a woman officially listed as dead for the past 5 years, is now serving on your base. And I'm also asking why she seems to have a very special interest in every single decision you make." With encryption levels that were basically screaming, Reed dragged a new file onto the main monitor. "About an hour ago, I broke into the Ghost Hawk mission archives. It took a top-tier JSOC override, but I got in. Way back in 2019, someone canceled a mission just 48 hours before the team was supposed to grab a high-value arms dealer named Konstantin Volkov. And that kill order, Colonel, was signed by you. The official reason was an intel leak, but there isn't a single shred of paper to prove it. No source, no report, nothing at all to show that the mission was ever compromised." Hale's jaw was clenched so hard it looked like it might crack. "My sources were classified. I didn't have to name them." Hayes chimed in, slapping a document down on the table. "Your sources were paid. I took a look at your finances. Not your personal accounts, of course. That would need a warrant. But I did find a neat little shell corporation," Hayes went on, "which, what do you know, is registered under your wife's maiden name. On April 10th, 2019, just 2 days before you killed that mission, a wire transfer for $200,000 magically appeared in that account. And the sender a holding company that traces right back to Volkov's financial network. All the air seemed to get sucked out of the room. Hale's face went from ghostly white to a splotchy, furious red. That is completely insane. You have no proof that money was tied to Reed's calm voice sliced right through his panicked sputtering. The transfer code on that deposit is a perfect match for payments sent to 3 other officers. All of them were later convicted on corruption charges. Same network, same payment method, same buyer. Calloway took one slow step forward. Colonel Hale, you are relieved of your command, effective immediately, pending a full criminal investigation. The military police are waiting for you outside. You will hand over your credentials and go with them to the detention facility. Hale's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. This is a setup! You're making up this entire fantasy based on nothing but thin air and the word of some ghost. It's a little more than her word, Reed said. He held up his phone and played one last audio file. This time, it was Hale's voice, crystal clear. Captain Anders needs to be handled. I don't care how you do it. Reassign her, fail her evaluations, make her life a living hell until she quits. Just get her off my base. The man on the other end, Major Cross, sounded confused. Sir, with all due respect, what's the problem? She hasn't done anything. And then Hale's voice came back, dripping with paranoia. Because if she stays, people will start asking questions I can't afford to answer right now. The recording stopped, and in the deafening silence, the entire career of a decorated traitor came crashing down. Calloway just raised an eyebrow. You had that little chat 4 days ago, right after Captain Anders arrived on this base. Hale just stood there, shaking, completely speechless. Reed pressed his attack. Captain Anders has been recording every single thing since she got here. Every word you said, every order you gave, every pathetic little attempt you made to ruin her career. She came here because she knew her team was sold out all those years ago. She just didn't know who did it. So she set a trap. She let you walk all over her, played the part of the weak, incompetent officer, and just waited for the guilty man to get scared enough to make a mistake. Hale finally found his voice, which came out as a strangled gasp. If she's Ghost Hawk, she's a huge security risk. She's the one who should be in handcuffs, not. She's a federal investigator, Calloway said, her voice like ice. Operating under the full authority of JSOC to conduct this investigation. You, on the other hand, Calloway finished, are under arrest. As if on cue, the door swung open, revealing 2 MPs. Hale looked at them, at the shiny handcuffs they were holding, and at the smoldering ashes of his life's work. This is all just a huge misunderstanding, he whispered. No, Calloway snapped back. The mistake was selling out your own soldiers for a bag of cash. This is just the bill coming due. As they led Hale away, the door clicked shut, leaving behind a thick, heavy silence. Hayes finally let out a long breath. Well, that got a little intense. Reed's eyes were still glued to the monitor, at the ghost of Lia's face in a file picture. We have to find her. Calloway nodded. I agree. Commander, I hear you have some history with Nightingale 7. Care to share? Reed paused for a moment. Then he told them everything. Syria, the convoy, the blinding explosion, the small hands that had pulled him from the burning, twisted metal, and the steady voice that had counted his breaths, keeping him tied to the living world. Calloway listened to his whole story without saying a word. When he was done, she stated simply, so she saved your life all those years ago, and you never even knew who she was. Not until today, Reed admitted, but I never forgot her voice. The way she was so calm, like dragging me out of a burning truck, was just another Tuesday for her. Hayes pulled a new file onto the main screen. I called in a favor with a friend at the JSOC archives and asked about the Ghost Hawk insignia. Turns out, operatives who finished 3 successful tours got the unit tattoo a hawk with its wings spread. But hidden clues in the design told you where they served and what their specialty was. He then zoomed in on an old, blurry photo. The picture showed the back of an operator in full combat gear, and right there, on the back of their neck, was the same exact tattoo Leia had. A hawk looking to the left means the Syrian theater of operations, Hayes explained. The folded wingtips mean the operative has a redacted file, a secret file, and the writing under the hawk is an operation code, 07 Sigma. That was the official name for the mission to take down Volkov. Calloway just stared, completely stunned. So, everyone on this base has been looking at that tattoo since she arrived, and nobody had a clue what it meant. That's because Ghost Hawk was so secret, Reed added, that even their own symbol was classified. Unless you knew exactly what you were looking for, you'd just think it was a cool tattoo. And she's been wearing the truth on her skin this whole time, Hayes said quietly, hiding in plain sight. Calloway finally looked away from the screen. Where is she now? Reed quickly pulled up the security feed. She's in her room at the barracks, Reed announced. Go get her. Bring her to my office. It's time we all had a proper talk. Reed and Hayes found Laya in her tiny room. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, still wearing the tactical gear from her last training exercise. She didn't look the least bit surprised to see them. Commander, Sergeant Major, she said, her voice perfectly calm. Reed walked in as Hayes closed the door behind them. Captain Anders, Reed started, or should I call you Nightingale 7? Laya looked him right in the eye without flinching. Laya is fine. Reed pulled over a small stool and sat down. Syria, 2018. The ambush on our convoy outside Aleppo. You were there. Laya gave a slow, deliberate nod. I was the analyst your team was supposed to be protecting. You pulled me out of the wreckage, Reed said, his voice heavy with a flood of old memories. My vehicle was on fire, he continued, the memory coming back hot and clear. I was trapped inside. You pulled me out. You stopped the bleeding until the rescue helicopter could land. You were 19, Laya said softly. Too young to die just because some traitor sold your route to the highest bidder. Reed stared at her, completely floored. What? That ambush wasn't just bad luck, Laya told him. Someone on the inside leaked our travel plans. We lost 2 good Marines that day. You were almost the third. Ghost Hawk started digging around and heard whispers about a mole, but we could never prove who it was. Hayes, who had been leaning silently against the wall, finally spoke. So JSOC sent you back in, deep undercover, to find the rat. Laya got up and walked to the window. Not officially. Officially, I died in 2019, right after Colonel Hale shut down the Volkov operation. You see, they never found my body, she explained, her voice steady as a rock. So it was easy enough to just close my file. But JSOC always suspected Hale was the leak. They just didn't have any solid proof. So they created a new identity for me. A new life as a desk jockey liaison officer with a perfectly clean, boring record and 0 field experience. They turned me into someone he would dismiss as a total nobody. Reed just shook his head as the pieces all clicked into place with incredible speed. So you just let him tear you down? You let everyone on this base treat you like you were worthless for weeks on end? It was the only way to get the evidence, Laya said, turning to look at them. I needed him to feel untouchable, to be so convinced that I was a nobody that he would get sloppy. Every insult he threw at me, every training drill he sabotaged, every single public humiliation, it was all recorded. It built a perfect pattern of harassment, proving he was obsessed with only me. And the only reason for that is because he was terrified that I knew exactly who he was. Hayes' eyes went wide, but if he thought you were Ghost Hawk, why would he make it so obvious he was targeting you? Wouldn't that just make him look guilty? He's not brilliant, he's a coward, Laya said, a thin cold smile on her face. The moment I set foot on this base, his only thought was how to get rid of me before someone made the connection to our past. His grand plan was to shatter my confidence and make me quit the program so quickly that nobody would bother to look closer. Reed shot to his feet. So you were the bait. I was the test, Leia corrected him gently. A test to see if Colonel Hale would crack under a little pressure. And he did, in the most magnificent way imaginable. She produced a small digital recorder from her pocket. Every illegal order, every instruction he gave to sabotage my gear, every single move he made to isolate and break me down, it's all right here. This is irrefutable proof that he abused his command. And when you match this audio with his financial records, you get a crystal clear picture of why he was so terrified. He knew his past was catching up to him. He just didn't put my face to it until this morning. Hayes let out a low, impressed whistle. You played that man like a violin. Laya's expression hardened. He took a payoff to sabotage a mission, and I lost 3 teammates because of it. This was never a game. This is a reckoning. Reed couldn't hold back the question nagging at him. But why let it go on for so long? The incident with the shirt, that was pure humiliation. You could have taken him down weeks ago. Laya's gaze met his sharp and intense. Because me showing up and revealing my identity only proves one thing, that I survived. It doesn't prove he's a traitor. I needed Hale to expose himself. I needed him to show the world he was desperate enough to try and destroy a fellow officer he supposedly never met. That level of desperation is what puts a man behind bars. And as if on cue, the door opened. It was Calloway. Captain Anders, your presence is required in the briefing room. Immediately. On the walk across the base, soldiers literally stopped in their tracks to stare. The word was out that something huge was happening. Hale's arrest, the arrival of military police, the rumor mill was churning at full speed. The briefing room was already packed. A panel of senior officers was seated at the main table. Calloway, a pair of investigators from the JAG Corps, a legal officer, and, sitting uncomfortably to the side, were Corporal Briggs and Lieutenant Foster. Laya paused and looked directly at them. Briggs jumped up from his seat. Captain Anders, I need to apologize for my conduct, for how I treated you. Foster echoed him with a firm nod. We both do. The story we were told was that you were just some officer who couldn't handle the pressure. It never even occurred to us to challenge that story. Laya regarded them both, her face a calm, unreadable mask. You were acting on the orders of a superior officer you were trained to trust. That's not an excuse, Briggs insisted, his voice gaining strength. I'm the one who ripped your uniform. I publicly degraded you, and I am truly sorry. I'm prepared to testify about every single directive Colonel Hale gave me. Foster then added, I also managed to pull his encrypted messages from the server. I located the correspondence between him and Cross, which outlines their entire strategy to make you fail. It's all there, in black and white. Laya gave them a slow, measured nod. Thank you. Calloway gestured toward the table. Captain Anders, please take a seat. We need to get your official statement on the record. Laya sat, and the recorder was activated. For the following 20 minutes, she unspooled the entire saga. She revealed everything. Her real name, Ghost Hawk, the mission that was deliberately compromised, the deaths of her teammates, her clandestine investigation that led her here, and every demeaning and dangerous act she had endured. She laid out the clear pattern of Hale's obsessive behavior and the mountain of proof she had so carefully compiled. When she concluded, a heavy silence filled the space. Calloway was the first to speak. Captain, I must ask, you withstood weeks of this abuse. You allowed this entire base to see you as incompetent. Why not just have him arrested on day one? Laya glanced down at her hands, folded neatly on the table. Because putting one man in jail doesn't repair a broken culture. It just gets rid of a symptom. I needed to prove that the culture itself enabled him, that it was possible for a CO to target and destroy a subordinate's career in plain sight, and nobody would do a thing to stop it. Every single person on this installation saw what was being done to me. They watched it happen, and with very few exceptions, they remained silent. She continued, her eyes sweeping across the officers in the room. That's the real disease here, not just Colonel Hale. He's a product of an environment that allowed him to operate without any fear of accountability. The legal officer leaned in. So, this entire operation was more than a sting to catch a corrupt officer. It was a live demonstration of the system's failure to protect its own people, and to create an undeniable official record of that failure, Laya affirmed. So the next soldier who tries to report abuse has documented proof that this system is flawed and can be forced to change. Real accountability isn't about revenge. It's about creating reform that sticks. Calloway nodded, a look of deep respect on her face. Your methods were certainly unorthodox, Captain, but the results speak for themselves. She turned to the investigators. What are your recommendations? One of them opened a folder. We propose a complete audit of Colonel Hale's command history, going back at least 5 years. We are also initiating a full review of the service record of every individual he supervised. In addition, we are launching a new anonymous misconduct reporting system, effective immediately, along with mandatory command climate training for all personnel. The other investigator chimed in. Furthermore, we are moving to grant official status and recognition to the Ghost Hawk program. That unit has served in the shadows for long enough. It's time they receive the credit they are due. Calloway gave a decisive nod. See to it. Captain Anders, you are hereby cleared of any and all misconduct. Your rank and all privileges are fully restored. Your service as Ghost Hawk will be entered into your official record, complete with all associated commendations. Laya simply nodded. Thank you, ma'am. Calloway then stood. There is one last item. The Joint Chiefs have authorized an offer for you to become an instructor at the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape School. You would be teaching survival skills to the next wave of Special Forces operators. You've demonstrated an ability to endure the unthinkable. We need soldiers with your fortitude, training our best and brightest. Laya considered the offer for a long moment. I appreciate that, ma'am, but I am not done here. Calloway's eyebrow arched. Done with what? Laya offered no reply. The meeting was concluded. As the others filed out, Reed stayed behind. Can I ask you something? He said. She turned to him. It's about Syria, he began, his voice barely a whisper. When you saved my life, you could have just left me, grabbed the intel and gotten out. That would have been the strategically sound decision. You were 19 years old, Laya said, her voice softening, and you were still breathing. That made the choice pretty straightforward. A knot formed in Reed's throat. I was never able to thank you for that. You just did, Laya said as she got up to go. It's been an incredibly long day, Commander. Go get some rest. She walked to the doorway, then paused and looked back. And Reed, you turned out okay. I'm glad I was around to see it. And with that, she was gone. Reed sat by himself in the now empty room, noticing his hands were trembling. It wasn't fear. It was a tidal wave of every emotion he had bottled up for years. Relief, grief, and a staggering sense of gratitude crashing over him all at once. Justice isn't always quick. It demands an immense amount of patience. And sometimes, it requires someone willing to walk through hell and back, just to drag the truth into the daylight. Do you think you would have that kind of grit? If this story got to you, hit that thanks button and be sure to subscribe, because the next phase is about to begin, and it's only going to get crazier. That night, a profound quiet descended upon the base. Hale was secured in the brig. His office was sealed with evidence tape, his records confiscated. The real story had spread through the ranks like wildfire. Soldiers who had openly mocked Laya just days ago now struggled to meet her eyes. Some looked ashamed, others were just dazed. A few seemed angry, not at her, but at themselves, for being so gullible, for never questioning the narrative that was fed to them, for choosing to go along with the crowd. Over in the mess hall, Hayes was quietly sipping coffee when Sergeant Carter sat down across from him. I heard the news about Captain Anders, who she really is. Hayes just gave a slight nod. You heard correctly. Carter just shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around it all. I watched her on the shooting range. I knew a shot like that was more than just luck, but I convinced myself it was a 1-in-a-million fluke, anything other than the truth that was right in front of my face. We all tend to see what we expect to see, Hayes said softly. She was banking on that. Carter fell silent again, letting the weight of it all sink in. Think she'll stay? Another soldier asked Hayes a few days later. Not a chance, Hayes replied. People like her are always looking for the next fight. He couldn't shake the image of the perfect, triangular brass casings she left at the shooting range, or her unshakable calm under pressure. In his 32 years of service, he'd never seen anyone use humility as a weapon the way she did, making her perceived weakness a shield and her patience a sharpened blade. It was both magnificent and terrifying. That night, sitting on my bunk in my room, I pulled out an old challenge coin. The metal was worn smooth. A hawk was etched on one side, on the other the serial number GH07114. It was the last piece of proof of who I used to be. I placed it on the nightstand, a quiet monument to a ghost who was very much alive, and opened my new assignment file, ready for whatever was coming next. Her world had shrunk to a cramped, dark room, with the laptop screen as her only sun. A single new message sat in her inbox from an anonymous sender. The subject line, a blank space that screamed danger. She clicked it open. The text was cold. Precise, Tower 4 is a go. New objective is Ramstein Air Base in Germany. You have 72 hours to get on site. To authenticate Phase 2 of Operation Nightfall, use Tango Hotel, November. It came with 3 attachments. The first was a satellite map of the base, littered with notes on building layouts, flight patterns, and the routes guards walked. The second file held profiles on 3 people, 2 guys and a woman. Their names were blacked out, but their job descriptions said it all. One handled logistics, another contracts, and the last one, finance. The last attachment was a simple, brutal command in bold red letters. Dismantle their network, seize their assets, settle the score. Laya's face was a perfect mask of calm as she read the words. This was the moment. Phase 2. General Hale was never the real problem. He was just one dead branch on a tree rotten to its core. The network of insiders who propped him up, the ones getting rich off the chaos of war while gambling with soldiers' lives, was still thriving. The agency wasn't looking for a simple cleanup. They wanted the whole crooked organization ripped out by the roots, and they had just handed her the shovel. She snapped the laptop shut, the back of her head making a soft thud against the cold metal wall of her bunk. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. For weeks, she had endured the beatings, swallowed the insults, and acted like a washed-up, worthless soldier. It was more than just physically draining. It was the kind of performance that eats away at your soul. There's a price you pay for letting people treat you like dirt, for watching them grin while you bleed. But it had all been for this. Hale was gone. The first shockwaves were already shaking the foundations of their corrupt little kingdom. And now, she finally had the green light to take down all the others. Pushing herself up, she walked over to the small window. The base was shrouded in darkness, dotted by just a few lights that traced the sentries' patrol routes. Everything seemed so normal, so peaceful. That's when she noticed him. A single figure was standing near the perimeter fence. He was too far away to see clearly, but she could tell he was staring right at her window. She stood perfectly still, just watching. The man brought a pair of binoculars to his eyes. He held them there for maybe 10 seconds, then lowered them and picked up a radio. Laya was too far away to hear anything, but she knew exactly what he was saying. The hawk is in the nest. Phase 2 is a go. Just like that, the man turned and melted back into the shadows. Laya remained at the window long after he had disappeared. She didn't feel triumphant. All she felt was a deep, soul-crushing weariness from a hunt that refused to end. She was tired of hiding in the shadows, tired of putting on a different face and pretending to be someone else. But how she felt didn't matter. The mission was everything. The 3 agents who lost their lives back in 2019, they mattered. The countless good soldiers betrayed by men like Hale, they were the ones who mattered. Real justice isn't some loud, dramatic explosion. It's quiet. It's done step by step, and it never, ever stops. When it came to that kind of work, no one was better. She turned away from the window, pulled her go bag from beneath her bunk, and began to pack. Some clothes, a first aid kit, her challenge coin, and a handgun. Everything she needed for a quick business trip to Ramstein. A sharp rap on the door made her freeze, her hand dropping instinctively to her weapon. A voice came from the other side. It's Reed. With a slow breath, she turned the lock. Reed was leaning against the wall across the hall, looking like he'd just lost a fight. My brain wouldn't switch off, he said, his voice hoarse with fatigue. I had a feeling yours wouldn't either. Laya moved aside, and he trudged in. He collapsed into the room's single chair while she perched on the edge of her cot. The silence was thick with unspoken thoughts, but he was the one to finally cut through it. You're taking off. It was a statement, not a question. Tomorrow, she confirmed, her voice low, long before the sun's up. Ramstein, he said, the name hanging heavy in the quiet room. Laya's expression remained a perfect mask of indifference. How'd you connect those dots? Because I know how your mind works, Reed answered, his gaze steady on hers. You don't just kill the snake in the grass and call it a day. You follow its tracks right back to the nest. Hale was just the fangs. You're going after the source of the poison, and you're not going to stop until you find out who opened the cage to begin with. Reed finished for her. That's the plan. He leaned in, his voice earnest. Let me come with you. Laya just shook her head. This isn't your fight, Reed. You saved my life, he shot back. That makes it my fight. You don't owe me a thing, she replied, her tone soft but unyielding. You recovered and became one of the best officers I've ever seen. That's more than enough payment for me. Reed paused for a moment. When I was 19, bleeding all over the inside of that Humvee, he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I thought that was it. The end of the line. And I'd made my peace with it. I knew what I signed up for. But then you were there, pulling me out of the wreckage, and you said something to me I've never forgotten. What was it? Laya asked gently. Reed looked her straight in the eye. You said, not today, not while I'm here. And for whatever reason, I believed you, and you were right. Laya looked away for a second. I was just doing my job. No, Reed insisted, his voice growing stronger. That was just you. The world needs more people like that. People who won't give up. People who would never, ever leave a soldier behind, he said, getting to his feet. Someone who will stand up for what's right, no matter what it costs them. He took a step toward her. Look, if you're going after these animals, you shouldn't go it alone. We've got resources, backup. You don't have to bear all of this by yourself. A tired, fleeting smile touched Laya's lips. I appreciate the offer, Commander. I really do. But some hunts are better suited for a lone wolf. You bring in a pack, and your target just vanishes. Reed nodded slowly, his expression full of understanding. Okay, then just make me one promise. When it's all said and done, when you've burned their entire network to the ground, you'll take a real break. Let somebody else hold up the world for a little while. Laya's silence was the only reply he got. With a sigh, Reed headed for the door, then stopped. Leia, thank you for absolutely everything. She gave him a short, single nod. Get some sleep, Commander, she said under her breath. He slipped out, and the door clicked shut behind him. She finished packing her bag with a calm, practiced efficiency, then lay down on the cot in her clothes, staring up at the ceiling. Sleep was a luxury she rarely had. Her mind was a constant slideshow of the faces she couldn't save, their last moments replaying over and over in the dark. But then she thought of the others, Reed, Lee, and a few more. The ones she times managed to pull through. That had to mean something. The ceiling fan spun in lazy, hypnotic turns, making the shadows on the walls dance. She began her nightly ritual. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold it for 4. Exhale for 4. Again and again. Little by little, the knot of tension in her shoulders began to unwind. The hurricane in her mind started to fade, and she finally let go. Her eyes opened at 4:30 in the morning, while the sky was still a sheet of black. She was dressed in seconds, slinging her bag over her shoulder as she moved like a shadow through the quiet barracks. A pre-dawn calm had settled over the entire base, the silence only punctuated by the footsteps of distant guards on patrol. She navigated her way to the motor pool, located the truck assigned to her, and tossed her gear in the back. The engine rumbled to life with a low, powerful growl. As she drove through the main gate, she took one last look in her rear-view mirror. The lights of the camp shrank behind her, disappearing into the vast darkness. She thought of Hale, Briggs, and Foster, every single man who had ever looked at her, and saw only a small, quiet woman they could easily dismiss. They were all about to get a painful education. Quiet doesn't mean weak, and patience is the sharpest weapon there is. She pointed the truck east, toward the airfield, toward Germany, and toward the next piece of her intricate plan. From his office window, Hayes watched her taillights dissolve into the night. He lifted his coffee mug in a silent salute. Have you ever been so thoroughly erased that you questioned if you ever existed at all? That's what they did to Laya. One day, she was Ghost Hawk, the top operative for a special forces team known as 07 Sigma. The very next day, she was an actual ghost, a dead woman walking. Her squad was ambushed, betrayed by the same command they had pledged their lives to, and the official report claimed they died due to their own incompetence. But the traitors made a colossal error. They never confirmed she was gone for good. And if you want to witness how a single forgotten soldier can bring an entire corrupt system crashing down, you're going to want to see this through. Laya's new reality was a universe away from the one she'd been ripped from. She now occupied a cramped apartment that perpetually smelled of damp concrete and stale pizza, working off the books, clearing tables at a greasy diner. She had become a complete nobody. People's eyes slid right past her, just another faded detail in the city's tired backdrop. But every single night, after sliding the deadbolt on her door, she would take out a heavy, steel coin and trace the engravings with her thumb. One side depicted a hawk in full flight. The other bore their team's creed: silent, lethal, forgotten. It had been a gift from her commander, a man who had recognized her potential when she was just a scrawny newcomer. "We are the ghosts in the machine, Leia," he had told her. "Our job is to ensure the world keeps turning, and no one is ever the wiser." Well, now they were all ghosts, and she was the only one left to haunt the men responsible for their death. Her initial target wasn't some high-ranking official. He was a nobody, a low-level data analyst named Arthur. Leia didn't kick in his door. Instead, she accidentally tripped and spilled a scalding coffee all over him just as he entered his office building. Amidst the profuse apologies and frantic dabbing at his jacket with napkins, she lifted his security badge, cloned it with a tiny device in her palm in under 3 seconds, and slipped it seamlessly back into his coat pocket. He was completely oblivious. That evening, she walked into his office, not to steal documents, but to glance at a sticky note on his monitor. It featured a child's drawing of a dog with Sparky scribbled underneath. That was her entry point. Just like that, the ghost was back inside the system. She didn't erase anything. She merely altered a single digit in a bank routing number for an enormous, illegal money transfer. It was a minuscule adjustment that was about to trigger a Category 5 hurricane of chaos. That single, delicate thread pulled her toward her next target, and it felt like a punch to the gut. The individual managing the clandestine accounts was a familiar face, a former handler she would have once trusted with her very life. She arranged a meeting, posing as an informant with dirt to sell. They met in a crowded cafe, but as he leaned in to speak, she caught the subtle glint of a microphone wire clipped to his collar. It was an ambush. In the space of a heartbeat, the cafe turned to chaos. Leia upended their table, hurled a heavy glass sugar dispenser like a flashbang, and vanished out the back before anyone even processed what had occurred. She left her old friend sitting there with a monumental problem, explaining to his superiors how he had let a dead woman slip right through his grasp. But the greatest secret was still buried deep. Following the money trail led her further and further up the chain of command, culminating with a 4-star general the entire nation revered as a hero, General Maddox. He was the one who had authorized her team's fatal mission. He had sold them out for a multi-billion-dollar weapons deal, then tarnished their reputations to cover his tracks. His betrayal was public, and she resolved that her revenge would be as well. Leia discovered that Maddox was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award at a huge, nationally televised gala. While the country prepared to honor a hero, she prepared to expose a monster. On the night of the ceremony, Leia, disguised as a caterer, slipped into the media control booth. As General Maddox walked onto the stage to a roaring standing ovation, she seized control of the broadcast. The massive screens behind him were meant to display a tribute video. Instead, they illuminated with encrypted bank statements, secret recordings of his treasonous acts, and the original mission file he had falsified, all with his digital signature glowing at the bottom. The applause sputtered out, replaced by a wave of stunned silence, which then broke into gasps from the audience. His entire legacy crumbled into dust. Live, for the entire world to witness. They didn't just walk him off the stage. Military police swarmed him. It turns out, justice can be incredibly loud. Weeks later, the scandal remained the #1 story on the planet, but Leia was gone. She was standing on a cliff, observing the sunrise over the ocean. In her hand, she held the challenge coin. She hadn't only achieved revenge, she had restored the honor of her fallen comrades. The motto was still there, silent, lethal, forgotten. But because of her, they would never be forgotten again. Laia carefully placed the coin on a small cairn of stone she had built, one for each member of her team. She was no longer a ghost haunted by her past. She was the woman who had dragged the truth into the light. And the moral of the story is quite simple. You can attempt to bury the truth, and you can try to erase good people, but a promise made between soldiers, that is one thing that will never, ever die.